The bullet shot through the night like a deadly star, missing Hazel Cooper's shoulder by a mere inch. She cursed under her breath, diving behind the upturned wagon as splinters of wood exploded where she'd been standing only moments before. This wasn't how she'd planned to spend her 24th birthday, pinned down by outlaws on the remote Colorado Trail with nightfall approaching and her father's cattle scattered across the hills. "Mighty fine shooting for a lady," a deep voice drawled from somewhere to her left. "But you're bound to run out of bullets before they do." Hazel squinted through the fading light, her Winchester clutched tightly in her dust-covered hands. A tall figure on horseback emerged from behind a cluster of pines, silhouetted against the crimson sunset. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, leading his chestnut stallion toward her position. "I didn't ask for your opinion," she called back, keeping her rifle trained on him. "And I've got plenty of ammunition." The man chuckled, raising his hands in a placating gesture as he approached. "Name's Jack Blackwood. I heard the gunfire from a mile away. Thought someone might need assistance. I'm used to doing this alone," Hazel replied tersely, her eyes darting between Jack and the ridge where the outlaws had disappeared. The cowboy crouched beside her, his weathered face illuminated by the last rays of daylight. Steel blue eyes assessed the situation with a calm that both irritated and reassured her. "Not anymore," he said simply, checking his Colt revolver with practiced hands. "Colorado Territory, 1876. The land was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, a place where fortunes were made and lives were lost with equal swiftness." Hazel Cooper had learned that lesson 3 years ago, when her mother died of fever, leaving her to help her father run their struggling cattle ranch. Now, with Pa laid up with a broken leg back at the homestead, she'd taken it upon herself to recover the stolen cattle that might be their last chance to avoid financial ruin. She hadn't counted on Hank Massey's gang finding her first. "Those are Massey's boys," Jack said, peering over the edge of the wagon. "I recognize the gray horse with the white sock. Belongs to Clyde Burnett, Massey's right hand." Hazel's eyes widened. "How do you know Massey's gang?" "Been tracking them for 6 months," Jack replied, his voice hardening. "I'm a bounty hunter, madam. And Hank Massey's got the highest price on his head in 3 territories." A bounty hunter. Hazel's grip tightened on her rifle. She'd heard stories about such men, lone wolves who lived by their own code, either lawmen nor outlaws. Dangerous men. But as the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached her ears, she realized she might not have much choice but to accept his help. "They're coming back," she whispered. Jack nodded, his expression grim. "Stay low. When I give the signal, fire 2 shots toward that outcropping of rocks, then duck down again." "I don't take orders from please," he cut in, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected gentleness. "Trust me." Something in his steady gaze made her hesitate, then nod reluctantly. As the riders approached, Jack slipped away into the growing darkness. Hazel counted to 30, then did as he'd instructed, firing twice at the rocks before ducking down behind the wagon. The response was immediate. A hail of bullets struck the wagon as the outlaws returned fire. But then came the sound of gunshots from a different direction, followed by shouts of confusion and pain. In the chaos, Hazel peered around the edge of the wagon to see 2 riders fall from their horses while the others scrambled for cover. "Now!" Jack's voice called from somewhere to her right. "Get to the trees!" Hazel hesitated only a moment before sprinting toward the pine grove, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, more gunshots rang out, but none seemed aimed at her. She reached the safety of the trees and pressed her back against the trunk, breathing hard. Moments later, Jack materialized beside her, reloading his revolver. "They're retreating for now, but they'll be back with reinforcements. We need to move." "My wagon." "Leave it. We can come back for it later. Right now, we need to get somewhere defensible before full dark." Hazel wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The wagon held supplies she couldn't easily replace, but her life was worth more. "My horse is tied up beyond that ridge," she said, gesturing to the north. Jack nodded. "Mine's nearby." We'll get them both and head for higher ground. I know a place about 3 miles from here, an old trapper's cabin. We can hole up there for the night. They moved silently through the forest, retrieving Hazel's paint mare before mounting up and riding hard into the gathering darkness. The mountainous landscape was treacherous at night, but Jack seemed to know every twist and turn of the trail. Hazel followed closely, her mind racing. Who was this mysterious cowboy who'd appeared just when she needed help most? And could she really trust him? The cabin Jack had mentioned turned out to be little more than a dilapidated shack nestled against a rocky hillside. Its roof sagged ominously, and the single window was covered with a piece of hide instead of glass. Still, it offered shelter from the elements and, more importantly, a defensible position. Home sweet home, Jack muttered as he dismounted and secured their horses behind the cabin where they wouldn't be easily spotted. It ain't much, but it'll keep us alive till morning. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and forgotten memories. A small stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a crude wooden table and a single bed frame with a moldering mattress occupied most of the remaining space. Jack moved with purpose, checking the perimeter before allowing himself to relax slightly. I reckon we're safe for now, he said, pulling a tin of matches from his pocket. Mind if I light a small fire? The smoke will disperse through the cracks in this roof, and we could use the warmth. Nights get cold up here. Hazel nodded, still wary but grateful for the shelter. As Jack built a fire, she took the opportunity to study him more carefully. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical strength. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious demeanor implied. A 3-day growth of beard shadowed his jaw, and his dark hair curled slightly beneath his dusty Stetson. He felt her gaze and looked up, those piercing blue eyes meeting hers across the small space. You hungry, Mississippi? I just realized I don't know your name. Cooper. Hazel Cooper, she replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. She brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face. And yes, I could eat. Jack reached into his saddlebag and pulled out some jerky and a small loaf of bread. It ain't much of a feast, but it'll keep us going. He handed her a portion before settling back against the wall, his rifle within easy reach. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Hazel's curiosity got the better of her. You said you've been tracking Massey's gang for 6 months? Why? Jack's expression darkened, and he stared into the small fire. They raided a settlement near Santa Fe last year. Killed everyone they found, including my brother and his wife. His voice was steady, but Hazel could hear the pain beneath the words. Their boy survived my nephew, Sam. He's living with my sister in Denver now, but I swore I'd bring Massey to justice. I'm sorry about your brother, Hazel said softly. Jack nodded, his gaze still fixed on the dancing flames. What about you? What brings a woman out alone in this territory with a wagon-load of supplies? Hazel hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. But something about this man, despite his dangerous profession, inspired trust. My father and I run a small ranch about 15 miles southeast of here. Last week, rustlers took 20 head of our best cattle. With my father laid up with a broken leg, it fell to me to track them down. Those cattle mean that much? They mean everything, Hazel replied firmly. We're barely hanging on as it is. Without those cattle, we'll lose the ranch by winter. She sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. I followed their trail for days before Massey's men ambushed me. I think the rustlers might be working with them. Jack considered this information, stroking his chin thoughtfully. Massey's been expanding his operation. Wouldn't surprise me if he's moved into rustling as well as robbery and extortion. He looked at her with newfound respect. That's brave, going after them alone. Hazel shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Like I said, I'm used to doing things alone. And like I said, Jack countered with the ghost of a smile. Not anymore. The warmth in his voice caught her off guard, and Hazel found herself blushing slightly. She turned away, pretending to adjust her bootlace. We should get some rest. I'll take first watch. I've got it, Jack said, rising to his feet. You sleep. You look like you could use it. Hazel wanted to argue, but exhaustion was quickly overwhelming her. The past few days of hard riding and tension had taken their toll. Wake me in 4 hours, she managed to say as she stretched out on the bare wooden floor near the fire, using her saddle as a pillow. Yes, madam, Jack replied, his voice tinged with amusement. Despite her intention to stay vigilant, Hazel fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the crackling fire and the strange sense of security that Jack's presence provided. When she awoke, pale morning light was filtering through the cracks in the cabin walls. She sat up with a start, realizing she'd slept through the night. Jack was crouched by the door, peering outside. You were supposed to wake me, she accused, annoyed at both him and herself. He glanced back at her, unrepentant. You needed the rest more than I needed sleep. That wasn't your decision to make. No, he agreed easily. But I made it anyway. Coffee? He held out a tin cup filled with steaming black liquid. Hazel wanted to stay angry, but the aroma of coffee was too tempting. She accepted the cup with a grudging nod of thanks. What's the situation? Quiet. Too quiet. Jack moved back to the window. I circled the perimeter at first light. No sign of pursuit yet, but they're out there. Massey doesn't give up easily. Hazel sipped the strong coffee, feeling it revive her spirits. Neither do I. I still need to find those cattle. Jack turned to face her, his expression serious. Those cattle might be the least of your worries now. If Massey knows who you are, he might decide to pay your ranch a visit. Your father could be in danger. The thought sent a chill through Hazel's body. She hadn't considered that possibility. We need to get back to the ranch, she said, rising quickly to her feet. We will, Jack assured her. But we need to be smart about it. Taking the direct route might be exactly what they're expecting. Hazel nodded reluctantly, recognizing the wisdom in his words. What do you suggest? We head north first, through Whispering Canyon, then double back. It's longer, but less likely to be watched. He studied her face for a moment. You trust me on this? Did she? Hazel wasn't sure. She'd only met this man yesterday, yet here she was, relying on him for her very survival. But her instincts told her Jack Blackwood was a man of his word, and right now, he was her best chance of getting home alive. I trust you, she said finally. Something flickered in Jack's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. He nodded once, then began gathering their meager belongings. We'll leave in 10 minutes. Stay low and keep your rifle ready. They rode out under the cover of early morning mist, keeping to the tree-line whenever possible. Jack led the way, alert for any sign of danger. Hazel followed closely, her thoughts divided between concern for her father and awareness of the man riding ahead of her. There was something compelling about Jack Blackwood, a quiet strength that drew her despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance. The journey through Whispering Canyon was tense but uneventful. The narrow passage between towering rock walls echoed with the sound of their horses' hooves, making Hazel jumpy. Every shadow seemed to hide potential danger, but Jack remained calm, his confidence gradually steadying her nerves. By midday, they had cleared the canyon and begun the circuitous route back toward Hazel's ranch. They stopped briefly by a small stream to rest the horses and eat a sparse meal of jerky and the last of Jack's bread. Tell me about your ranch, Jack said as they sat on sun-warmed rocks beside the burbling water. Hazel's expression softened at the thought of home. It's not much compared to some, but it's ours. My father built it with his own hands after the war. We run about 100 head of cattle in good years, fewer in bad ones. She sighed. The last 2 years have been bad. Drought, wolves, and now rustlers. And your mother? Died 3 years ago. Fever took her in less than a week. Hazel's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jack could see the pain in her eyes. Since then, it's just been Pa and me. We have a ranch hand, old Tom, who helps out, but he's pushing 70. That's why recovering those cattle is so important. Without them, we won't make it through another winter. Jack nodded, understanding in his gaze. My family had a small spread in Texas before the war. Lost it when the banks failed in '67. My father never recovered from that loss. Died a broken man 2 years later. Is that why you became a bounty hunter? Partly, Jack admitted. The pay is good when you catch someone with a high price on their head. And I've always had a knack for tracking. He tossed a small stone into the stream, watching the ripples spread. But after what happened to my brother, it became personal. Hazel studied him, seeing beyond the tough exterior to the pain beneath. What will you do after you catch Massey? Jack looked surprised by the question, as if he never considered it. I don't know, he said finally. Haven't thought that far ahead. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness, perhaps, or the beginnings of something deeper. Then Jack cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. We should keep moving, he said, offering his hand to help her up. Still a good 5 hours to your ranch if we push hard. Hazel accepted his hand, feeling a jolt of warmth at his touch. She withdrew quickly, uncomfortable with her reaction. Let's go, then. They rode in companionable silence for the next few hours, the landscape gradually shifting from rocky highlands to rolling foothills dotted with pine and aspen. As they crested a final ridge, Hazel felt a surge of relief at the sight of her home in the valley below, a modest 2-story cabin with a barn and corral, surrounded by acres of grazing land. There it is, she said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. Cooper Ranch. Jack surveyed the property with a practiced eye. Good defensive position. Clear sight lines in most directions. He frowned suddenly, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising from behind the barn. That fire's not right. Too small for a cooking fire, and in the wrong place. Hazel felt her heart race. Could be old Tom burning brush, but it could be trouble. Jack finished, his expression grim. We approach carefully. Stay behind me. They descended the ridge, keeping to the cover of trees as much as possible. As they drew closer, Hazel's unease grew. There was no movement around the property, no sign of her father or old Tom. The usual sounds of ranch life, chickens clucking, the distant lowing of cattle, were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. They dismounted 100 yards from the house and tied their horses in a small grove of aspens. Jack checked his revolver, then nodded to Hazel. Stay close, but keep your head down. If there's trouble, don't hesitate to shoot. They moved cautiously toward the house, using outbuildings for cover. The source of the smoke became clear as they rounded the barn, a small campfire, recently abandoned, with coffee still simmering in a pot. Someone's been here, Jack whispered. Recently. A crash from inside the house made them both freeze. Then came the sound of raised voices, angry, threatening. Hazel recognized one of them with a surge of fear. That's my father, she breathed, gripping her rifle tighter. He's in trouble. Jack held her back with a firm hand on her arm. Wait. We need to know what we're dealing with. They crept closer to the house, staying low beneath the windows. As they reached the front porch, the voices became clearer. I told you, I don't know where she is. Hazel's father's voice was strained but defiant. My daughter rode into town for supplies. She'll be back tomorrow. You're lying, old man. The second voice was cold, menacing. My boys saw her tracking the cattle yesterday. She knows too much, and Massey wants her found. I don't know any Massey, her father insisted. Now get out of my house before I... A sharp sound of impact was followed by a grunt of pain. Hazel started forward instinctively, but Jack held her firmly. 3 of them, he whispered after peering quickly through a window. Your father's tied to a chair. 2 men questioning him, one watching the back door. He met her eyes. We need a distraction. Hazel thought quickly. The barn. There's kerosene inside. We could start a small fire, no need to damage your property. Jack replied. I have a better idea. Can you get to the back of the house without being seen? She nodded. There's a cellar entrance on the east side. Good. When you hear the commotion out front, come in through the back and get your father out. I'll handle the rest. Hazel wanted to argue it was her father, her responsibility, but she recognized the logic in Jack's plan. Be careful, she whispered, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. Jack's eyes softened momentarily. Always am, Miss Cooper. He squeezed her shoulder once, then melted away into the shadows. Hazel circled around to the east side of the house, finding the cellar doors partially hidden by overgrown bushes. She waited, counting her heartbeats, until the sound of rapid gunfire erupted from the front of the property. Inside the house, she heard shouts of alarm. Footsteps pounded across the wooden floor as the intruders rushed to respond to the threat. Taking advantage of the chaos, Hazel slipped into the cellar and up the narrow stairs into the kitchen. She found her father still tied to a chair in the main room, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. His face lit up with relief and alarm when he saw her. Hazel! What in tarnation? No time, Pa! She whispered, quickly cutting his bonds with her hunting knife. Can you walk? Harold Cooper grimaced as he stood, favoring his splinted leg. Reckon I'll have to. More gunshots rang out from outside, followed by a cry of pain. Hazel helped her father toward the back door, praying that Jack was all right. They had just reached the kitchen when the back door burst open, revealing a burly man with a scarred face and a drawn revolver. Well, well, he sneered. Found you after all, girl. Hazel raised her rifle, but in the confined space of the kitchen, with her father leaning heavily against her, she knew she couldn't get a clean shot before the man fired. For a terrible moment, time seemed to freeze as she stared down the barrel of his gun. Then a deafening bang shattered the silence, and the man crumpled to the floor. Behind him stood Jack, his smoking revolver still raised. You all right? He asked, his eyes quickly assessing Hazel and her father. We're fine, she managed, her voice shaking slightly. The others? Won't be bothering anyone anymore, Jack replied grimly. He holstered his weapon and moved to help support Harold. Let's get your father somewhere safe. Together, they helped the older man to the sofa in the main room. Harold Cooper was a sturdy man in his 50s, with the same auburn hair as his daughter, though his was streaked with gray. He looked from Hazel to Jack with open curiosity. Seems I owe you my thanks, stranger, he said, extending a weathered hand. Harold Cooper. Jack Blackwood, Jack replied, shaking the offered hand. And no thanks necessary. Your daughter would have done the same for me. Harold raised an eyebrow at Hazel. You want to tell me what's going on, girl? Who were those men, and how did you come to be riding with a gunslinger? Hazel sighed, sinking into a chair opposite her father. It's a long story, Pa. Well, I ain't going nowhere with this leg, Harold replied dryly. And it seems we've got bodies to deal with, so you might as well start talking. Over the next hour, Hazel recounted her attempt to track the stolen cattle and her encounter with Jack. For his part, Jack explained about Massey's gang and his own mission to bring them to justice. Harold listened intently, asking occasional questions but mostly absorbing the grave situation they found themselves in. So these men today were just the beginning, he said finally. Massey will send more when these don't report back. Jack nodded soberly. That's likely. We should prepare for that possibility. The ranch hands? Hazel began. Old Tom's locked in the root cellar, Harold interrupted. Been there since yesterday when these varmints showed up. The other 2 hands are out on the north range with what cattle we have left. Won't be back for 3 days. Jack moved to the window, scanning the surroundings with practiced vigilance. We should get the bodies buried and make some preparations. If Massey follows his usual pattern, we might have until tomorrow before more men arrive. Harold struggled to his feet. I may be laid up, but I can still shoot. This is my land, and I'll defend it. Pa, you need to rest. Hazel protested. I'll rest when I'm dead, Harold retorted. And I don't plan on that happening anytime soon. He looked at Jack with newfound respect. You any good with that iron on your hip, Blackwood? A hint of a smile touched Jack's lips. Good enough, sir. Well then, Harold said, reaching for a shotgun mounted above the fireplace. Let's get to work. The next few hours were spent in grim preparation. Jack and Hazel buried the 3 intruders in shallow graves behind the barn, while Harold freed old Tom from the root cellar and sent him to alert the distant ranch hands. They then fortified the house as best they could, boarding up windows and creating firing positions. As night fell, a tense calm settled over the ranch. Harold eventually retired to his room at Hazel's insistence, leaving her and Jack keeping watch from the front room. You should get some rest too, Jack said softly as Hazel stifled a yawn. I'll wake you if there's any sign of trouble. She shook her head stubbornly. I've slept enough. Besides, this is my home. I should be the one protecting it. Jack studied her in the flickering lamplight, admiration evident in his gaze. You're quite a woman, Hazel Cooper. The unexpected compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. Just doing what needs doing. That's what makes it remarkable, he replied. Most people do what's easy. You do what's right, no matter the cost. Their eyes met across the dim room, and Hazel felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had been growing since their first meeting. Jack was unlike any man she'd ever known. Not just because of his skill with a gun or his quiet confidence, but because of the way he looked at her, not as a woman who needed protection, but as an equal partner in this dangerous situation. Why did you help me? She asked suddenly. Back at the wagon. You could have ridden on, continued tracking Massey without getting involved in my troubles. Jack was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. I've spent 6 months chasing Massey's shadow, watching the aftermath of his cruelty. When I heard those shots and saw you standing your ground, he shrugged slightly. Maybe I was tired of arriving too late to help. Well, I'm grateful you arrived when you did, Hazel said softly. Jack's smile was genuine, transforming his rugged features. So am I, Miss Cooper. So am I. The night passed without incident, though either of them got much sleep. They talked in low voices about their lives. Before this moment, Jack spoke of his years drifting from town to town as a bounty hunter, while Hazel shared stories of ranch life and her dreams of expanding the property someday. As dawn approached, they found themselves sitting side by side on the porch steps, watching the eastern sky lighten. If we survive this, Jack said quietly, what will you do? Hazel considered the question. Keep ranching, I suppose. It's all I know. Find those stolen cattle if I can. She glanced at him. And you? After Massey? Jack's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. I don't know. I've been so focused on catching him, I haven't thought much about after. He hesitated. Maybe it's time to stop drifting. Find a place to put down roots. Any place in particular? Hazel asked, her heart beating a little faster. Before Jack could answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats broke the morning stillness. They both stood, instantly alert. Riders coming, Jack said, reaching for his revolver. At least 6, maybe more. Hazel rushed inside to wake her father while Jack scanned the approaching horsemen through a spyglass. By the time she returned to the porch, his expression had changed from tension to surprise. Those aren't Massey's men, he said. That's Sheriff Tanner from Silverdale, and those look like deputies with him. Sure enough, as the riders drew closer, Hazel recognized the tall figure of Sheriff James Tanner, a man who'd been a friend to her family for years. Beside him rode 5 armed men, all wearing deputy badges. Hazel Cooper! Tanner called as they approached the house. Your ranch hand Tom found us on the road. Said you might be needing some assistance. Relief washed over Hazel as she stepped forward to greet them. Sheriff Tanner, you're a sight for sore eyes. The lawman dismounted, his weathered face creased with concern. Tom told us about the trouble. Said you had 3 of Massey's boys buried out back. His gaze shifted to Jack, instantly wary. And who might this be? Jack Blackwood, Jack answered for himself, holstering his weapon but keeping his stance cautious. I've been tracking Hank Massey for some time. Recognition flickered in Tanner's eyes. Blackwood. I've heard that name. You're the bounty hunter who brought in the Carson brothers last year. Jack nodded. That's right. The sheriff seemed to come to a decision. Well, Mr. Blackwood, it seems we're after the same man. I've been gathering a posse to go after Massey's gang. They've terrorized this county long enough. He turned to Hazel. How's your father? Recovering, she replied. But worried about more of Massey's men showing up. That's why we're here, Tanner said. Got word from a reliable source that Massey himself is camped at Eagle Creek, about 15 miles west. Planning something big, from what I hear. He looked at Jack. If you're still hunting him, you're welcome to ride with us. Jack hesitated, glancing at Hazel. The ranch will still need protection. I'll stay, Hazel said firmly. Pa and I can handle things here. We're leaving 2 deputies behind, Tanner added. Just in case. Jack still seemed conflicted. Massey's dangerous. He won't go down easily. All the more reason to have someone of your skills along, the sheriff countered. Hazel could see the struggle playing out on Jack's face, his desire to finish the mission that had consumed him for months versus his reluctance to leave her potentially in danger. She stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. This is your chance, Jack. The chance you've been waiting for. She met his gaze steadily. Go. We'll be fine here. After a long moment, Jack nodded. All right. But I'll be back when it's done. The simple promise carried weight that belied its brevity. Hazel found herself nodding, not trusting herself to speak. Within the hour, the posse was ready to ride. Jack had checked and rechecked his weapons, filled his canteen, and said a respectful goodbye to Harold Cooper. Now he stood beside his horse, facing Hazel one last time. Be careful, she said, trying to keep her voice light. Jack reached out, his calloused hand gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture left her momentarily breathless. I will if you will, he replied softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, so many things unsaid between them. Then Sheriff Tanner called out that it was time to ride, and the moment broke. Jack mounted his horse with fluid grace. I'll be back before you know it, he said, tipping his hat to her. I'll hold you to that, Cowboy, Hazel replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She watched them ride away, standing on the porch long after they'd disappeared from view. The 2 deputies left behind tactfully gave her space, busying themselves with checking the property's defenses. Inside, Harold Cooper was waiting in his chair by the fireplace. You've got feelings for that bounty hunter, he observed as Hazel entered. She started to deny it, then sighed and sank into the chair opposite him. It's foolish, isn't it? I barely know him. Harold shrugged. I knew your mother for 3 days before I asked her to marry me. Sometimes you just know. He studied his daughter's face. He seems like a good man, despite his profession. He is, Hazel said softly. But his life is on the trail, Pa. He doesn't stay in one place. People change when they have reason to, Harold replied, his eyes wise. Just like circumstances change when you least expect them to. The waiting was the hardest part. 3 days passed with no word from the posse. Hazel tried to keep busy with ranch chores, but her thoughts constantly strayed to Jack. Was he safe? Had they found Massey? Would he really return as promised? On the 4th day, as Hazel was mending fence in the north pasture, one of the deputies called out to her. Riders coming, Miss Cooper! Her heart leaped into her throat as she dropped her tools and rushed to the ridge where the deputy stood with a spyglass. He handed it to her wordlessly. Through the lens, Hazel could make out a group of horsemen approaching slowly from the west. In the lead was Sheriff Tanner, his distinctive gray hat visible even at this distance. Behind him rode several others, including Jack, she breathed, relief flooding through her. He was alive. But as the riders drew closer, Hazel could see that all was not well. Jack was slumped in his saddle, his shirt stained dark across one shoulder. Another man rode beside him, ready to catch him if he fell. Hazel ran to the house, calling for her father. By the time the riders reached the ranch yard, she was waiting with clean bandages and her mother's old medical kit. Sheriff Tanner dismounted first, his face grim but satisfied. "We got him, Miss Cooper. Hank Massey won't be troubling anyone ever again." But Hazel barely heard him, her attention fixed on Jack as he was helped from his horse. His face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Told you I'd be back," he said weakly. "You're hurt," she replied, moving quickly to his side. "Just a scratch," Jack insisted, though he winced as he tried to straighten. "Took a bullet meant for me," Tanner corrected. "Saved my life." With the help of one of the deputies, Hazel got Jack inside and settled on the sofa. His wound, a bullet hole high on his left shoulder, had been hastily bandaged during the journey, but needed proper cleaning and dressing. "Everyone out," she ordered once Jack was comfortable. "I need space to work." The men complied, leaving Hazel alone with her patient. As she carefully removed the dirty bandages, Jack watched her face. "You're good at this," he observed. "Had plenty of practice," she replied, concentrating on her task. "Ranch life isn't exactly gentle on the body." She cleaned the wound with whiskey, her touch gentle despite Jack's sharp intake of breath. "The bullet went clean through." "You're lucky." "I know," he said quietly, and something in his tone made her look up and meet his gaze. The intensity she found there made her heart skip. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. "I had something to come back for," he added softly. Hazel felt her cheeks warm. "Jack, let me say this while I've still got the courage," he interrupted. "Or maybe it's the blood loss talking." His smile was wry, but his eyes remained serious. "I've spent years drifting, Hazel. Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But these past few days, being with you," he took a deep breath, "it's made me wonder if maybe I've been running from the wrong things." Hazel's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I rode out with that posse, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not just because I was worried about your safety, but because—" he hesitated, vulnerability clear in his expression. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Tears pricked at Hazel's eyes, but she blinked them away. "You barely know me, Jack Blackwood." "I know enough," he replied firmly. "I know you're brave and stubborn and loyal to a fault. I know you'd risk your life for your family and your land. I know you're the kind of woman a man could build a future with." His voice softened. "If she wanted that too." Hazel's hands trembled slightly as she finished bandaging his wound. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She never expected this, never imagined that in the midst of danger and uncertainty, she might find something so precious. "What about your life as a bounty hunter?" she asked finally. "The open trail, the freedom?" Jack's expression grew thoughtful. "Freedom's a funny thing. I've been free to go anywhere, do anything. But I've never been free to belong somewhere." His eyes met hers again. "I'd trade all that wandering for a chance to build something real. Something lasting." Hazel set aside the bandages and took Jack's hand in both of hers. "You know ranching isn't easy. It's hard work, long days, and uncertain rewards." "Sounds a lot like bounty hunting," Jack replied with a small smile. "Except with better company." A laugh escaped her then, bright and genuine. "You're impossible, Jack Blackwood." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope lighting his eyes. "It's a maybe," Hazel replied, her own smile widening. "Let's see if you still feel this way when you're not bleeding and exhausted." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "I will. Some things you just know, Hazel Cooper." Outside on the porch, Sheriff Tanner shared a flask of whiskey with Harold Cooper as they watched the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. "Your daughter saved that man's life," Tanner observed. Harold took a slow sip before responding. "Might be he's saving hers too, in a different way." "You think he'll stay?" Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Man doesn't look at a woman the way he looks at Hazel if he's planning to leave." He gazed out at his land, at the fields and pastures that represented generations of hard work and dreams. "Besides, this place could use another good hand. Someone to help carry the load. He's got a reputation," Tanner warned. "Made some enemies over the years. Haven't we all?" Harold replied philosophically. "Man deserves a chance at a new beginning. And my Hazel deserves some happiness." Inside, Hazel had convinced Jack to rest, promising to wake him for supper. As he drifted toward sleep, his hand still holding hers, he murmured something that made her heart swell. "Not alone anymore. Either of us." Summer faded into autumn, and the Cooper ranch saw many changes. The stolen cattle were recovered, thanks to information extracted from Massey's gang. The ranch hands returned, along with Old Tom, and found themselves working alongside a new addition to the staff, Jack Blackwood, whose skills as a horseman and tracker proved invaluable. Jack's shoulder healed slowly but completely under Hazel's careful attention. As his strength returned, so did his determination to prove himself worthy of the second chance he'd been given. He worked from sunrise to sunset, learning the rhythms of ranch life with the same focus he'd once dedicated to tracking outlaws. Harold Cooper watched the developing relationship between his daughter and the former bounty hunter with quiet approval. He saw how Jack deferred to Hazel's knowledge of ranching, never letting his pride get in the way of learning. And he noticed how his serious, practical daughter had begun to laugh more, her eyes lighting up whenever Jack entered a room. By the time the first snow dusted the mountains, the question wasn't if Jack would stay, but how permanently he would commit to his new life. The answer came on a crisp November evening, as Jack and Hazel returned from delivering a calf at the north pasture. They rode side by side, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The sunset painted the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold, creating a scene of breathtaking beauty. "I never really noticed sunsets before I came here," Jack remarked, drawing his horse to a halt on a ridge overlooking the ranch. "Was always too busy looking over my shoulder, I guess." Hazel stopped beside him, following his gaze. "And now?" "Now I find myself looking forward instead," he replied softly. He turned in his saddle to face her, his expression serious. "Hazel, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened as she met his gaze. Over the past months, their relationship had deepened into something neither had expected but both cherished. They'd shared kisses and whispered promises, but had taken things slowly, each understanding the other's need for certainty. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that glinted in the fading light. "I rode into Silverdale yesterday. Had something special made." He opened his palm to reveal a simple band of silver with a small blue stone that matched his eyes. "It's not fancy, but it's solid. Like what I want to build with you." Hazel stared at the ring, then at Jack's face, scarcely daring to believe what was happening. "I love you, Hazel Cooper," Jack said, his voice deep with emotion. "I love your strength and your spirit. I love the way you face each day with determination, no matter how difficult. I love the home you've created here." He took a deep breath. "I can't offer you a perfect past or guarantee a perfect future. But I can promise you all that I am, from this day forward. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Hazel's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jack Blackwood, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there. Jack leaned across the space between their horses to kiss her, a kiss filled with promise and hope for the future they would build together. As they rode down to the ranch house, where Harold waited on the porch as if he'd somehow known this moment was coming, Hazel felt a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, ranching never was, but she would no longer face its challenges alone. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked as they approached the house. Hazel smiled, remembering their first conversation by the upturned wagon all those months ago. "I'm thinking that I used to believe I had to do everything alone. That depending on someone else was a weakness I couldn't afford." Jack's expression softened with understanding. "And now? Now I know that the real strength comes in finding someone worth depending on," she replied. "Someone who makes you better than you were before. Not alone anymore," Jack said, echoing his words from that first night at the ranch. "Not anymore," Hazel agreed, her heart full. "And never again." They were married on Christmas Day, in a simple ceremony at the ranch house. Sheriff Tanner officiated, while Old Tom and the ranch hands stood as witnesses. Harold Cooper gave his daughter away with tears in his eyes and welcome in his heart for the man who had already proven himself not just as a ranch hand, but as family. As snow fell gently outside the windows, Hazel and Jack exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of partnership, respect, and unwavering love. When Jack kissed his bride, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, with music from a fiddle played by one of the hands and plenty of home-cooked food. As evening drew on, Harold raised his glass in a toast. "To my daughter and her husband," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "May you build a life as sturdy as this land and as beautiful as your love for each other." Later, as Jack and Hazel stood on the porch looking out at the starlit night, he wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close against the winter chill. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. Hazel leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the safety and love he represented. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Me too," Jack said. "Who would have thought that a stray bullet and an upturned wagon would lead to this?" Hazel turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Perhaps it wasn't chance at all, but destiny." Jack smiled, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I like that idea. That all those years of wandering were just leading me here. To you. To us," Hazel corrected softly. "And everything we'll build together." As the years passed, the Cooper Ranch, soon known as the Cooper Blackwood Ranch, prospered under their joint care. Jack's reputation as a former bounty hunter faded, replaced by respect for his skills as a rancher and his fairness in business dealings. Hazel's dream of expanding the property became reality, as they acquired neighboring land and increased their herd. Harold Cooper lived to see his first grandchild born, a strong-willed girl with Jack's blue eyes and Hazel's auburn hair, followed 2 years later by a son who inherited his grandfather's thoughtful nature and his father's talent for tracking. Through drought and abundance, through difficult winters and glorious summers, Jack and Hazel faced life's challenges together. Their partnership, forged in danger and cemented by love, became a legend in the valley, a story told around campfires and at social gatherings. And sometimes, when the children were asleep and the night was quiet, Jack would pull Hazel close and whisper the words that had changed both their lives. "Not alone anymore. Not ever again." To which Hazel would always reply, with love in her voice and gratitude in her heart, "Not anymore."